What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Do What You Love. I'm Jeff Kirkshin, your host, and I'm so excited to be with today's or this week's guest. JAG of the JAG show has been a friend of mine for quite some time. For my WJPZ alumni friends out there, you're probably familiar with John Gay as well. He is a radio alum. He is a longtime radio host in many different cities, and I can't wait to talk about the many places he's been to explore as a radio host myself as well. I know the feeling of entering into a new place as a radio host. We'll get into that, and also some advice for anybody looking to start a podcast or improve their own podcast. Welcome in, Jag of the Jag Show. What's up, brother? How are you?
I'm great, Jeff. Pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I have to say straight up, if you're listening to Do What You Love, Jag is a big reason why this ever got off the ground, because of his advice and his confidence that he instilled in me. This is a project I've wanted to do for so long I've wanted to start my own podcast, and with the support of Beasley Media Group and the support of people like Jag, I've been able to do it. And just right off the bat, thank you, because you inspire not only me, but so many other podcasts out there to continue to do what we love in podcasting.
Well, you're very kind, Jeff, but a lot of this is your own natural talent, and your resume certainly speaks for itself. So I think for you, all it was a matter of just simply, sitting down and doing it. And I'm just happy to have a small help to you a little bit, but this is all you. I'm thrilled to be on your show.
Jag, you've said that before on your show, the Jag Show podcast. You've got to check it out. I will put all of the links in our show notes, to steal a line from Jag there. And,
Thank you.
And so you can check him out if you are a podcaster in any sort of realm. It is fascinating, the things you break down. And I kind of want to bring that to the forefront right now. If someone's listening saying, man, I wish I was like Jeff, I wish I was like Jag, I wish I had my own podcast, there's a lot of time, a lot of steps to get there, but what's step number one that you got to do?
You got to know what you want to do. A lot of it, we both have journalism backgrounds, and they say who, what, when, where, why, how. That's part of it, is knowing who's going to be on your show, who you're talking to, what you're going to talk about, when you're going to do the podcast. But the why is also important too, Jeff, because you have to know your reason for doing it. And there are some folks who want to do a podcast just as simply a vanity project, and they say, hey, my friends think I'm funny, and they tell me I should have a podcast. And you know what? If you want to do it for that reason, absolutely, have fun with it. There's no reason not to. But if your goal is to, grow your audience and foster a community and either provide a service or information to somebody, or create, or even to grow revenue at some point because you want to monetize the podcast and grow your audience. This is an old lesson from radio that you and I have both learned working in radio. You've got to make it about your audience, not about you, because anybody can go on and just talk about themselves and whatever they want to talk about. I made the joke in my show a few weeks ago that when I was a senior at Syracuse, my Patriots won their first Super Bowl. So I was 21 years old, and I'm on the air on our college radio station, Z89, talking about how great it was the Patriots won the Super Bowl. But if I had to do it over again, I don't think top 40 listeners in Syracuse, New York really cared as much as I did that the Patriots had won the Super Bowl. So it's really a matter of turning that mirror on your audience and focusing on them if you want to grow the show. But to the point a minute ago, the big thing is the first step is just getting a plan and doing it. It's so hard to get started, but once you get started, you can kind of get that ball rolling. Nobody's going to go back and listen to their first show and think, oh, that was great. You're going to go back after show 10 and go, oh my God, 1 was awful. You're going to go back after 20 and go, oh, 11 was terrible, and so on and so forth. Just always try to keep getting better. And as long as the show has reasonable audio quality and good content, you'll be all right.
I think that's great advice, and I think I can speak to that. I'm going to get the math wrong here. I think this is episode 9 or 10 of mine, and I already am looking back to my first couple episodes, and I'm not discouraged by anything, but I'm saying, wow, look at how much I've learned in this time. And
You're such a positive guy, Jeff. That's a much better way to look at it.
I try to stay positive, because this, even though I've been in radio since I started at Z89 at Syracuse University, this is a different animal. And I think the world of podcasting, who would have thought, Jag, that with the way the world was going with technology and everything, that audio would be at the forefront of the lives of so many people. And when 5 years ago, when I started in radio professionally with Q104 in Cleveland, people were like, radio, what is that? And no one was really consuming podcasts at a deep level. And now look at where it is. Do you think that the surge of audio in podcast world is going to help radio and traditional FM AM radio?
If is my key word there. If. I think podcasting has learned a lot from radio, but I think radio could learn a few lessons to podcasting. And I think outside morning shows like yours and talk radio, there has been a sort of a limitation on music DJs and how much they talk. And there's a long history of this, and I'll spare you the 2-hour history lesson. But the Cliff Notes version is, about between 2000 and 2010 or so, they told us music DJs, shut up and play the music. Just play the music because people are here for the music. Well, at the time, that probably made sense. But as the Spotifys and Pandoras and Sirius XMs of the world came into prominence, people can get music anywhere. And why would you listen to a playlist somebody else created, a program director somewhere, if you can listen to something you created yourself on Spotify or Pandora? So the real differentiating factor for radio now is the personality. And I think radio is starting to see this, and I've seen, afternoon shows have more content and not just be 10 seconds over the beginning of a Katy Perry song or whatever it was when I was doing it. And I think radio is learning from podcasting that there are real personalities that people can connect with. And to go back to your point a minute ago about audio, yes, video is like the sexy thing on the internet, and people love video, and everybody's doing video. But as you know, being a morning show host, there's an intimacy to audio where if you think about the morning show you listened to on the bus going to school as a kid or going to work, you felt like you knew the person on the other side of that radio because you heard so much of them. They were with you every day. They were with you in good times and bad, not to be hokey about it, but you really felt the connection with them, and they paint the picture for you in your mind's eye, and that is so much more of an intimate experience than just staring at the idiot box on the wall and watching whatever primetime show you're watching.
You're absolutely right, and your example of middle school bus is exactly how I got into radio, and I think there's an intimacy to it to get to know people. And yeah, okay, you can go on Pandora, you can even get, the premium subscriptions and not have to deal with any commercials, but then you're right, now it's getting to the point where everything is so readily available. I actually had a student a couple years ago, I was speaking to a high school, and they asked me, why would I listen to the radio when I can get any song I want on my phone?
Instantly.
And I said, okay, it's a very good point. What app do you use? Well, I could use any. Okay, what songs do you pick? Well, I don't know. And I said, well, you're going to do that while you're driving? There's a lot going on. He says, well, yeah, sometimes it's a little overwhelming. I don't know what I want. I don't know what podcast I want. I don't know what... and I said, okay, let me stop you there. Now it's becoming so oversaturated with the amount of music, different places to get content. Why don't you just let us make it easy for you? At least that's my pitch in the morning radio realm. Is like, I'll make you laugh. I'll make you cry one day. I'll let you sing along. I'll give you some information as well as what's going on in your city here in Las Vegas. And maybe I can make your day simpler.
I like that. And I'd never really heard the music side of it presented in that way. And that's a really interesting way to put it. So your point is well taken. But I go back to the personality side of it. If you were just picking music and playing a bunch of songs from 6 to 10 every morning, that, I don't think there's as much appeal in that. But because you are weaving in personality, and I've heard some of the stuff you've done, and some of the stuff you guys did, after the shooting in Vegas a couple of years ago was just really, really touching and great work that you did there, Jeff, you and Amy. And I think that, I think that the combination of personality and connecting with that audience can really be what sets radio apart. And the same way, look, Joe Rogan has got a great following on a podcast because people know him and they know his personality. Guys, podcasts like Pod Save America and The Daily, like you feel like you know the people that are hosting it because you hear it every day. Pod Save America, one of the best things about that show, and I won't get political here, but one of the best things about the show is they mess around in their live reads and their commercials. They screw around and laugh and sometimes even make fun of the company they're advertising. But the company is okay with that because that's true to their brand and their personality. And there's still millions, literally millions of people listening to that show. So, okay, they don't mind being poked fun of a little bit if they're getting their message out in front of a few million people.
Well, I think that's such a great point to bring up, because you would never in a million years be talking about a live read, a commercial read on a podcast, unless it was unique, unless it was different, unless it was funny, unless it was fun. And we see that all the time in commercial radio, the difference between the big booming voice, come on down, to, or versus, hey guys, it's Jeff, let me tell you about what I'm doing this weekend.
Exactly.
It makes a huge difference. And when it comes to podcasting, talking about the difference between radio and podcasting for me is I find myself having guests on the show, pre-recording them. Oh, big alert to people who listen to radio there. Sometimes we pre-record interviews. Not everything can be live all the time. And you'll have 10, 15 minutes with an up-and-coming artist, and you can only really air like maybe 3 minutes, put 8 minutes on the web, and that's even too much. And I feel like I have these conversations that have to get cut short with amazing people running local nonprofit organizations, or people with amazing stories to tell. But hey, I got to get back to a hit record here soon, or else I'm going to lose people. And so podcasting, I feel like, has given me that freedom.
I think so. And for a lot of radio people that either start a podcast as they're still working in radio, or if they've left radio and they've gone on to do other things, there is a freedom there. And there's the cliche of like, oh my God, I can swear in a podcast. Oh, I could never swear on the radio. This is so cool. But there's a place for that in certain contexts, obviously. Right. But there's also that, the biggest thing is what you just said, Jeff, that expansion that, you know, my podcast, when I do an interview on my podcast, it's usually about 30 minutes. But I had one guest that was fantastic that went for about an hour and a half. And because she was that good, I just let her keep going. And, you know, when I sit down and record with a client, okay, how long should this be? Say, about half an hour or so. But you know what? If it's 22 minutes and 12 seconds, okay. If it's 38 minutes and 6 seconds, fine. It's not a primetime television show. It's got to be out at 22 minutes and 30 seconds. It can go as long as it needs to go. And I always tell clients, don't stretch. When you're done, you're done. One of my very first clients was interviewing a cancer doctor, and this guy was like Dr. Fauci. He was like fantastic, spoke so well, answered every question brilliantly. We were planning on 30 minutes. She asked all her questions. He answered them. She looked at me and said, "How long was that?" I said, 15. She said, "Oh no, what do we do for the rest of the time?" I said, "Nothing. We're done." Yeah. Because we got the information out and in a good way in 15 minutes. There's no reason to try to fill another 15 minutes. The information's here. It's done.
Yeah, and that's a great point to bring up, Jag, and that's something you told me when I started this podcast. And for anybody starting a podcast, thinking about starting a podcast, or you already have one and you're interested in learning more, JAG Show. The JAG Show, you can follow him in the show notes at JAG in Detroit as well for more details on this. That's one thing you and I talked about for a long time. First question you had, okay, what are you talking about? Okay, well, I've met some really fascinating people in my life, and I want to talk to passionate people about what they're most passionate about, because it won't be an interview, it'll be a conversation. And then you said, okay, how long is it going to go for? And I said, I would say like 30 minutes, but depending on how it goes. I mean, one of my great radio mentors, Dom Theodore, always says, go as short as possible, but as long as necessary. And I think that can fit for podcasting as well. Go in the sense of, don't drag it on, exactly as you said. You don't need to go 30 minutes. If you got a great 12, that's way better.
Yeah, absolutely. Dom Theodore is a huge name here in Detroit. He built Channel 955, the station that I worked for from 2011 to 2012, and actually went across town and built what was then 98.7 AMP Radio, a second station that I worked for from 2016 to 2017. He's a big name here. Yeah,
Dom Theodore is one of those guys, and people who work in radio, he is a very well-known, especially in the Detroit area. He was a longtime radio consultant, morning show consultant for our show, and is a huge part as to why Jeff and Amy in the Morning has seen the success we've had here in Las Vegas, 3.5 plus years, getting re-signed to contracts, sticking around in Vegas, and wanting to be here because of people like Dom Theodore. So, and that's the crazy thing about radio is how, and I hate this word, but I won't say it, incestuous, but how everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows, and for you, Jag, you were in commercial radio for so long, and then you found yourself pivoting to podcasting, and now you're out of it doing full-time podcasting and podcast consulting. How crazy has that transition been for you?
It was a lot, and I really have to give a lot of credit here to my wife, Ellen. She is a life partner and a great partner. We joke that she is the CFO of JAG in Detroit LLC because she helps me with the books and helps me with all the behind-the-scenes stuff. And I'm a solopreneur. I'm running the business by myself. So when I need a second set of eyes or ears on something, I'll say, "Hey, honey, I've got this situation with this client. How do you think I should handle it?" And she's always great about giving me a different perspective on things. So we were in Hawaii for her 40th birthday in 2018. And I had been laid off from my last radio job the year before. I got married in July of 2017 and got laid off 2 weeks later for a corporate merger and a budget cut. I later found out that they wanted to lay me off the week before my wedding, and my immediate boss said, "Hey, I'm going to this guy's wedding Saturday. Can we just wait 2 more weeks before we eliminate his position?" So I got a stay of execution, basically. But I was really not sure what I wanted to do. I thought from being a radio DJ for 15 years, maybe I want to get into marketing or social media, all these things that we do every day as radio DJs, Jeff. I'm like, okay, well, it's a natural transition for me. And I thought, well, let me try this. And I was applying to stuff and agencies and wasn't getting anything. And I was kind of dabbling in podcasting a little bit. And we were in Hawaii for my wife's 40th. And, she's working. I'm not working. I'm unemployed. And she looks at me and goes, "Listen, between the applying to marketing jobs and the podcasting, you're kind of half-assing 2 different things. I need you to pick one and whole-ass it."
Wow.
And I said, and it was kind of the wake-up call that I needed. And I said, okay. So the way I kind of got into podcasting was Warren Kurtzman, who's a consultant with Coleman Insights in North Carolina, introduced me to this guy, Seth Ressler, here in Detroit, who works for Jacobs Media here in Detroit. His official title is Digital Dot Connector. He does a lot of radio stuff and digital stuff for their client radio stations. And so I got connected with Seth, and Seth was doing a show about the arts and entertainment scene, which is growing very quickly in Detroit, or at least pre-pandemic. And he's like, "Hey, I need a producer for this podcast." I'm like, "Okay, well, it's kind of related to radio. Let me come help you out and help you put together this show every week." And then his co-host ended up leaving the show, so I slid into the co-host chair and co-hosted for a little while as well. And I remember Seth saying, "Dude, Podcast Movement is the world's biggest podcast convention. It's in Philly this year. You should go. Think about doing this for a career." And I said, I can't go. I'm not working. I don't have this money to go on a trip to Philly. He's like, "Trust me. Put on your credit card. Do something. Go." So I went. I met these amazing people. I saw how collaborative and cooperative the podcasting space was, and I said, "Oh my God, this is awesome. This is what radio was when I got into it 15 years ago. This amazingly collaborative space. This is something that I think I really want to get involved with." And Seth had been saying, "Oh, you should produce a podcast for somebody, charge X amount of money," and then imposter syndrome kicks in, which we've all had, where it's like, "Oh, I can't," and I'm a people pleaser too. Asking people for that much money to do this kind of thing? Nobody. But eventually, I slowly built the business over time, and now I help people launch and create shows, produce shows for them, and then I have some clients that record their own shows, send it to me, and I edit it for them and send them back. I've learned since 2018 when I started this, I've learned a lot more than I ever learned about audio production and equalization and mastering and all these technical stuff, but then also applying the same radio skills we've been talking about, okay, conversation flow, not beating around the bush too much at the beginning of the show, getting right into your topic, not going off on too many tangents, bringing it back in, a lot of things you would do as a morning show host. And I've learned a lot in the last 4 years. And, your show is called Do What You Love. I've been fortunate to do what I love in 2 different careers. I loved radio when I worked in it. And then when it was time for me to leave radio, I love everything about podcasting and helping people create great content that either makes them money, grows their audience and their profile as a business, or they just really enjoy the show.
Jag is the guy you need to talk to if you're thinking about launching a podcast. You can talk to him. The Jag Show podcast is available now anywhere you get your podcasts, of course, and you can follow him at Jag in Detroit as well. If you're looking to launch something, feel free to message him. Feel free to reach out. Now, Jag, I want to go towards radio. There was something that you brought up that I think is super important. I started in commercial radio professionally, at least, after WJPZ back in 2015. Mm-hmm. And I loved it from, as you said earlier, growing up. I felt like I knew these people, and I wanted to be that person for a kid on the bus, for a family, for whoever it might be. And I quickly learned in 2015, I was on the tail end of the fascination of radio, and I was in the radio exodus era, where people are losing jobs left and right, things are downsizing, and moving away from the word radio, as you have said quite a bit. And it's heartbreaking. As a morning show host and somebody who's committed their life, at least I like to think, to doing radio, that's why I started this podcast. I'm going to be completely honest. I started this podcast not worried about my company, Beasley Media Group, but worried about radio as a whole. I needed to be able to stand on my own 2 feet with something in my hands that I can call my own, and that I can be proud of, and that I can walk away with just in case the great apocalypse of radio happens. And Jag, I don't want to sound negative, but you and I have both seen so many great radio hosts on the beach, as they say, that will never go back to radio ever again. Now, you've found a way to continue your love and doing what you love in the means of podcasting, which has its similarities to radio, but there's so many people being pushed away from it. It's heartbreaking.
I think, and I try to be careful in my podcast, Jeff, because I don't want to come across as the bitter old guy that used to work in radio, because when I worked in radio, there were so many of them. Oh, back in 1973, we were splicing reels with razor blades, and we didn't have to deal with all this kind of stuff, and I don't want to be that guy. But what you say about radio, there is a real concern because of corporate consolidation and the fact that so many talented people have lost their jobs. So it's that much harder to get a job when it opens because there are so many talented people. For those who don't know, on the beach is like the industry term for being out of work and not working. I think I would tell anybody in radio, in all seriousness, to have a backup plan. Think about what it is that you also love or that you also do well. You know, you talk to radio guys. I know a former radio guy who's driving an Uber in Miami. You know, because he wants to make ends meet, and he just likes being around people, and that's you know what he chose to do. I think that one thing that radio DJs, I mentioned imposter syndrome earlier. One thing that, and again, it's all radio people, but I'll speak specifically to DJs. Radio DJs don't realize how many skills they actually have. Because think about how quickly your brain runs if the station's off the air. Think about like how you start going through that checklist. Okay, that's working, that's working, that's working, that's working, that's working. Okay, that's not it, that's not it. Okay, here it is. Okay, boom, we're back on the air. Think about how quickly you can react under pressure to something like that. Think about when you're interviewing somebody and they say something that completely takes a left turn in the interview, and you're like, okay, well, you have to make that decision and think, okay, I was going to ask these 6 questions, but what they just said, oh, wow, okay, I got to follow up and go down that route. Even math, timing out, like, okay, I got to be out at this time to hit the commercial break at this time. And then communication skills. There are people who are wallflowers and just are not good at having a regular conversation. The fact that you are a communicator in whatever medium that is puts you light years ahead of so many other people in a job application pool. And I would say, too, that when you are looking to do something else, if you do leave radio, don't be afraid to eat your humble pie. Don't go in cocky and think, well, I was this big-time radio DJ. I can, they'd be lucky to have me. I've gotten burned the first few jobs I applied to after I got out of radio. Well, everybody loves me. I'm a radio DJ. No, you got to have a little bit of self-awareness, but also know that there are a lot of skills you bring to the table and know that those skills will apply to whatever it is you're looking to do, but figure out how they translate so you can explain that in an interview, would be my say. But have a backup plan, know what else you like, knowing that that radio may not be forever, but knowing that maybe you find a way to reinvent yourself. Like you're doing with this podcast is another avenue for you. Like I've gotten into podcasting, which is almost a natural transition from radio. It doesn't have to be podcasting. It doesn't have to be audio, but think about something that you really enjoy doing. Maybe it's marketing. Maybe it's social media. I'm not saying if you're working in radio, you're going to lose your job, but the industry is really tough right now. So think about what else you want to do. I've talked to too many people that they get blown out and they're like, I wasn't expecting this. I don't really know what to do. So just be prepared.
Yeah. If you don't have a backup plan, then you're not thinking ahead and thinking for yourself and thinking for, your family. I mean, I have a dog and a fiance and a house now. I mean, my life has changed so much in a year that, a big part of this was I wasn't able to be the guy who could just get up and move to any market that had some crazy opening, and I can now do it. Done. I'll see you there. Yeah, when do you need me? Tomorrow? Sure, I'll get in my car. I'm there. And I've lost that luxury willingly, of course, to settle down, start a family, build a house, have a dog, just be happy. But I've spent so much time in my life worried about professional happiness and professional success that I've lost track of. I don't want to say I was sad. I'm the happiest, luckiest guy on earth, but I definitely haven't focused and sat down and said, okay, what's important to me? At the end of the day, if none of this existed, what is the most important things? That's my friends and my family and anything I can hold within, arm's reach. It sounds crazy, but that's basically it. And
it's so funny, Jeff, because you are 5-10 years younger than me or whatever it is. I feel like I'm looking at the ghost of Christmas past talking to you, because this is exactly what happened to me. So I got let go from my job here in Detroit at the end of 2012, and I was like, okay, well, got to figure out what the next gig is. Okay, so I went down to New Orleans for 3 years, which was, of course, an amazing city, and got to meet some great people, have some great food, have some great drinks, listen to some great music for the 3 years I was there. But the friend that I had in Detroit that we stayed in contact and eventually became more than friends, and after 3 years in New Orleans, it was like, okay, this is going to be something serious. And I really did love the Detroit area from when I lived here the first time, and I said, okay, I'm going to quit my job, and I'm going to move back to Detroit and move in with Ellen. 9 months later, we got engaged. 9 months later, we got married. She hasn't thrown me out yet, so we're still doing okay. And I decided Detroit is an area where I wanted to put down roots, and she's a person that I wanted to settle down with. And the second Detroit radio job I got after moving back here. I just kind of it worked out that I got that gig for a year plus after moving back here. But I got to a point where I decided that, yeah, where I was going to be and who I was going to be with was more important than chasing that next gig. So your point is certainly well taken.
Well, I'm shocked that I uttered those words out loud, because that was not where I thought I would be 8 months ago, yet alone, 8 minutes ago, and talking. Where I'm with JAG, the JAG Show. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. If you're looking to start a podcast, he's the guy. He's helped me so much in the launch of Do What You Love. JAG, I can't thank you enough. Now, one question that I think a lot of people think about when they get a podcast is, okay, how do I make money? Yes. And I know that's the big, quite literally, $1 million question, that monetization of a podcast. And it's the understanding that if you have good content and you start to gain a good following, maybe there's a chance you can monetize. But I've basically been told and thought in my head that what I'm trying to do every single week with Do What You Love, I'm not going to see any return for 3 years, 4 years. And that's what I've just told myself, so that if after 1 year I get return, I'd be happy. But I feel like as a podcast consultant through your business, do you get this question a lot? I'm sure most of the time.
I think the first question I get is, how long should my show be? The second question is, how do I make money? So you're right on point, Jeff. And I'd say at least 1 year. You're probably right. You're probably closer to it with 2 or 3 or 4 years. You have to build something. You have to build something that somebody's going to want to spend money on. And to ask somebody to spend money on something is a really big ask. So, yes, if you get 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 downloads a show, yeah, you can sell to a mattress company or ZipRecruiter or like one of those big podcast advertisers once you hit a certain threshold. But you got to focus on the content first, and then have a good show, build the following. But you may not have thousands of people listening. The average mean, median, I always screw those words up. But essentially, if you're getting 125 downloads per episode, you're in the top 50% of all podcasts.
Wow.
And so people don't realize that. If you have a specialty with your podcast, and a decent audience, you can probably find a sponsor that way. You remember in college, people would talk, make a joke about an easy class and say, like taking basket weaving 101. So I always use basket weaving as an analogy. If you were really passionate about basket weaving and you did a podcast about basket weaving, you might have 25, 30 listeners, if you're lucky. But I can almost guarantee you there is going to be a basket company out there that would love to get in front of the people that you have their undivided attention for 15 or 30 minutes every week or every month or whatever it is. So there is money to be made in the specialization area. For me, my podcast is about podcasting. I would look for a sponsor that has something to do with podcasting, whether it was a service that provided remote recording software or a microphone company or whatever it was. I would look in that realm. But you really got to focus on building your show more so than worrying about the money right away. If you're chasing the money right away before you can build a solid foundation, you're going to fail at it. I'll give a shout out to a friend of mine named Matt Kundle, who's up in Winnipeg. He was a longtime Canadian radio person who is now a podcast consultant who specializes in marketing and growing shows. He's brilliant. When I have a question about marketing and growing a show, I call Matt Kundle. He has a podcast called the Sound Off Podcast. It's about radio people, which is a great podcast as well. And he says, don't worry about making money right away. At least a year. Build your show for at least a year, if not longer, and then worry about maybe trying to monetize it. You might get lucky. A friend of mine named Joel Salsihai, who has a podcast based here in Detroit called Stacking Benjamins. It's a financial advice podcast. He was at a financial advice conference or one of those type deals, and he went up to Fidelity. And he was like, hey, would you guys want to sponsor a podcast? And the rep from Fidelity was like, well, how much? I forget the exact number he gave. He said, I don't know, $100 an episode. What's $100 to Fidelity? Right. I mean, come on. Right. So now he's got, it's the Stacking Benjamins podcast sponsored by Fidelity. I mean, how's that sound for street cred? So you put a name like that behind it. So he told that story at a podcast panel that I was at once, and it blew me away. And I said, wow, that's brilliant. So, don't be afraid to ask somebody in your niche. But if you get into podcasting with the express intent of making money and that's your priority, it's not going to work. You've got to create good content before you can monetize it.
I think that is such great advice for any podcast creators. And honestly, if I wasn't on camera right now, I would have a notepad out. Every time I talk to Jag, I have a notepad out. Or I'm on my phone following whatever podcast he just mentioned. The Sound Off you said, I'm gonna have to follow that one next, and because Jag is just chock full of information when it comes to the podcasting world, and that is some great advice because I have seen some really great numbers for the first couple episodes, a dip and then an increase and then a dip, and if you follow the numbers, it can be really heartbreaking. But at the end of the day, it's conversations like this that I can, when I get finished with this, and get it up on the web. And get it onto our Spotify, Apple, all of our podcasting apps, it's just going to feel good that I did it, and that's the feeling I rely on now. And then eventually down the road, I think that we could make this into something. And just like anybody else who's starting a podcast, just like me, you can make it into something that maybe can be monetized.
And honestly, Jeff, and you know this from radio, think about how unhappy radio personalities and program directors are when they spend their whole day looking at the ratings and what ticked up and what ticked down and all that. Especially in a podcast you're starting out, because just statistically, because you have a small sample size of only a handful of listeners, that number can change wildly. I've heard a couple theories that podcasting listeners are down lately because New York and California just opened back up and people are getting back out again. And those are the two largest media markets in the country. I've heard the theory that because Apple Podcasts revamped their podcast app, and it's been, in my opinion, a disaster, that some people are not as subscribed to shows like they were before, and shows aren't showing up as easily as they did before, and maybe there's a dip in your podcasting listeners because of Apple. Maybe it was just a week where people traveled a lot. Maybe it was July 4th. Maybe it was Christmas. Maybe your title didn't grab somebody's attention. Maybe your show notes weren't optimized that well for SEO. There are so many variables that go into it. If you spend all this time poring over your numbers, you will drive yourself literally crazy.
Honestly, great advice, and I'm taking it at heart, being a new podcast in the podcasting world. Jag, the Jag Show, you got to follow him wherever you get your podcast, Jag in Detroit, as well on social media. Jag, I can't thank you enough for joining Do What You Love. You are the epitome of just that, and I want to thank you once again. You're one of the many people who supported me in this dream of mine to launch my own podcast, and I appreciate your time today.
Jeff, congratulations on all your success. Real pleasure to be here. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Thanks, brother.